You know, I've been flying in and out of the United States for over 2 decades now. I've watched the security lines get longer. I've seen the shoe removal rule come and stay, and I've adapted to more pat-downs than I care to count. But nothing, and I mean nothing, has caught me off guard quite like what happened to me at a routine traffic stop just outside of Phoenix back in February of this year. I was driving a rental car, minding my own business, slightly speeding down a straight desert highway, when those flashing red and blue lights appeared in my rearview mirror. I pulled over, grabbed my license, rolled down the window, and prepared for the usual script. License and registration, sir? Do you know why I pulled you over? The standard dance. But what happened next was something I was completely unprepared for. The officer didn't ask for my registration right away. He didn't even glance at my license. He just looked at me, pointed at the car's infotainment screen, and asked, "Is that thing on?" I thought he was joking. I thought maybe he was referring to my GPS. But he wasn't. And that's when I realized that the entire legal landscape of driving in the United States had shifted under my feet while I wasn't paying attention. The year is 2026, and there is a new federal framework for traffic laws that has been quietly rolled out. Yet if you ask the average driver on the street, they have absolutely no idea it exists. So let me ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me in the comments. When was the last time you actually read an update to your state's driving laws? Or do you just assume that the rules you learned in driver's ed 20 years ago are still the rules today? I'm genuinely curious, because based on what I'm seeing on the roads, most people are driving around with information that is not just outdated, but potentially dangerous in a legal sense. I want you to really think about that for a second. The rules of the road are not static. They change. They evolve. And when you miss an update, you don't just risk a ticket. You risk a cascade of consequences that can follow you across state lines, affect your insurance rates for years, and in some cases, even put you in a situation you never imagined. I'm going to walk you through exactly what changed in 2026, why it happened, how law enforcement is handling it, and most importantly, what you need to do right now to avoid becoming a statistic. Stick with me, because some of this is going to sound unbelievable, but I promise you it's real, it's already being enforced, and the ignorance around it is widespread. Let's start with the biggest shift, the one that caught me in Arizona. The federal government, in coordination with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and a coalition of state governors, quietly passed what is formally known as the Driver Assistance Technology Safety Act. Now, that sounds like bureaucratic jargon, I know. But what it actually means for you and me is that your car's technology is now legally regulated in ways that have nothing to do with emissions or fuel economy. We're talking about the screens, the buttons, the touchpads, and the semi-autonomous features that have become standard in nearly every new vehicle. For the first time, the law draws a very hard line between what is considered a driver aid and what is considered a distraction. And the penalties for crossing that line are steep. Here's where it gets interesting. Prior to 2026, most distracted driving laws focused on handheld devices. You couldn't hold your phone to your ear, you couldn't text, and in many states, you couldn't even touch your phone while the car was in motion. But car manufacturers have been adding larger and larger screens, and they've been moving more and more controls onto those screens. Climate control, radio, navigation, even windshield wipers in some models. The old laws didn't really account for the fact that a built-in screen could be just as distracting as a phone, if not more so. So the new law closes that gap. It establishes a federal standard for what is called operator engagement with non-essential display interfaces. And the key phrase there is non-essential. Under the new rules, if you are touching a screen to do something that is not directly related to the immediate safe operation of the vehicle, and you are not pulled over safely on the side of the road or in a parking lot, you are technically in violation. Now, you might be thinking, what does that even mean? Let me give you a real-world example. Imagine you're driving down the highway and you want to change the song on your playlist. You reach over, you tap the screen, you scroll through your library, and you select a new track. That entire sequence, from the moment your finger touches the screen to the moment the song starts playing, is now a legally scrutinized action. If an officer observes you doing that, and if they determine that your attention was diverted from the road for more than a de minimis amount of time, you can be cited. But it gets deeper. The law also addresses the issue of mode confusion with semi-autonomous systems. You know, the cars that have lane keeping assist, adaptive cruise control, and even partial self-driving capabilities. The 2026 Act requires that drivers remain cognitively engaged with the driving environment at all times, even when these systems are active. That means you cannot watch a movie, you cannot read a book, and you cannot take a nap. But more subtly, it means you cannot rely on the car to the point where your reaction time slows down. And here is the kicker. Law enforcement officers are being trained to recognize the signs of over-reliance on automation. They look for things like your hands being too far from the wheel for too long, or your eyes being fixed on the center screen instead of the road ahead. I had a conversation with a state trooper in Virginia last month, and he told me something that really stuck with me. He said that before 2026, if he pulled someone over for swerving, it was almost always alcohol or fatigue. Now, he says, it's increasingly automation intoxication. People let the car handle the steering for 20 miles. They get comfortable. They start fiddling with the entertainment system. And the moment the system encounters something it can't handle, like faded lane markings or a sharp curve, the driver is caught completely off guard. The new law gives the officer the ability to cite that driver not just for the unsafe driving, but specifically for failing to maintain proper engagement with the vehicle's controls. It's a different charge, and it carries different points on your license. Now, let's talk about something that hits closer to home for travelers: rental cars. If you are someone who flies into a city and rents a vehicle, you are at the highest risk of running afoul of these new laws. Why? Because rental cars are often the newest models, loaded with the latest technology. You get into that car at the airport, you're tired, you're in a hurry, and you start poking at the screen to get the Bluetooth connected, to set the navigation to your hotel, to adjust the seat warmers. Under the 2026 framework, all of that activity is considered potentially illegal if you are doing it while the vehicle is in motion. And here is the scary part. The rental car companies are not required to brief you on this. In fact, most of them don't even mention it in the contract. I've made it a personal habit now, when I pick up a rental, to pull into the cell phone lot or the parking garage and spend 10 minutes just setting everything up before I ever put the car in gear. I pair my phone, I input the destination, I adjust the mirrors and the seat, and I familiarize myself with where the basic controls are. It sounds like common sense, and it is, but you would be amazed at how many people skip that step because they feel pressure to get on the road. That 10 minutes could save you a ticket and a whole lot of hassle. But the changes aren't just about screens and automation. There is another layer to this that involves how vehicles communicate with each other and with infrastructure. The 2026 Act includes provisions for what is called V2X, or Vehicle-to-Everything Communication. This is the technology where cars broadcast anonymous data about their speed, position, and direction to other vehicles and to traffic signals. The idea is to reduce collisions, improve traffic flow, and eventually pave the way for fully autonomous driving. But here is the part most people don't know. This data is also being used for enforcement. Not in a big brother spying on you kind of way, at least not yet, but in a very practical, immediate way. Let me give you an example. In several pilot cities, including parts of Michigan and California, traffic lights are now equipped with receivers that can detect if a vehicle runs a red light, not through a camera, but through the signal broadcast by the car itself. If your car is V2X equipped, and most new models are, and you run a red light, the system can automatically generate a citation and mail it to the registered owner. This is happening right now. It's not science fiction. And the 2026 law provides the legal framework for these citations to be valid without an officer present, as long as the technology is certified. Now, I know what you're thinking. What if I'm driving an older car? What if my car doesn't have this broadcasting capability? Does that exempt me? For now, yes, but the trend is clear. The infrastructure is being built around the assumption that cars are connected. The law encourages states to adopt these automated enforcement methods, and many are doing so because they see it as a revenue source and a safety measure. The days of talking your way out of a ticket with a charming smile are rapidly coming to an end. The machine is watching, and it is recording. Let's shift gears and talk about another huge change that has flown under the radar: the standardization of impaired driving laws regarding cannabis. Since legalization began spreading across the states, there has been a patchwork of laws and enforcement techniques. Some states used blood tests, some used saliva, some used behavioral observation, and some didn't really know what to do at all. The 2026 Act creates a federal baseline for what constitutes impairment from cannabis while driving. And this is where things get controversial. The law establishes a per se limit for THC in the blood, similar to the .08 limit for alcohol. But here's the problem, and this is where I have to give you my personal opinion. The science on THC impairment is nowhere near as clear-cut as it is for alcohol. THC stays in the bloodstream of chronic users for days or even weeks after any impairing effects have worn off. So the new law attempts to address this by setting a higher threshold for chronic users, but it's still a messy situation. If you are a regular user and you get pulled over and they draw your blood, you could be over the limit even if you haven't consumed anything in 2 days. The law tries to account for this by allowing expert testimony about your usage patterns. But do you really want to be the test case? Do you want to spend the money on a lawyer to explain to a judge that you weren't high? You just have a high baseline? My advice, and I say this as someone who has no moral stance on cannabis use, is to be extremely careful. If you consume, and you know you're going to be driving, the safest legal position is to treat it like alcohol. Do not get behind the wheel for many hours after consumption. And if you are a daily user, be aware that you are driving in a legal gray area every single time you start the car. The law enforcement community is aware of this issue, and they are receiving training on how to identify impairment regardless of the numbers, but the numbers still matter. If your blood test comes back high, you are going to have a very difficult day. Now, I want to talk about something that I find personally frustrating, and that is the change in how speeding is enforced in work zones. We all know we're supposed to slow down in construction areas. We've all seen the signs, the doubled fines, the workers in orange vests. But the 2026 law introduces a new concept, the automated work zone. This is a construction area where the speed limit is not just posted, but is dynamically adjusted based on the presence of workers and equipment, and it is enforced by cameras and radar that are integrated into the construction zone itself. Here's how it works. Imagine you're driving on a highway that has construction barriers on the side. There are no workers visible, so you maintain your speed, maybe even creep up a little. But unknown to you, there is a sensor network that has detected a crew working just around a bend, out of your line of sight. The variable speed limit sign, which you might have missed, has dropped the limit to 45 miles per hour. Your speed is recorded by a camera as you pass through. A week later, you get a ticket in the mail. The fine is substantial, and because it's a work zone violation, it often carries double points. The argument from the authorities is that it protects the workers. The argument from drivers is that it feels like a trap. And honestly, both sides have a point. My take on this, based on my travels, is that you have to treat every construction zone as if the speed limit is 45 or whatever the lowest possible limit could be, regardless of what you see. The signs are getting smarter, but they are also getting harder to notice because they are often electronic and only change when conditions change. If you blow through a zone at 65 because you didn't see the sign change, the system doesn't care. It recorded your speed, and it recorded the limit at that exact moment. Ignorance is not a defense in the automated world. Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Why is all this happening now? Why 2026? The answer is a combination of technology maturation, federal pressure to reduce traffic fatalities, and a desire for uniformity. For years, traffic laws were the purview of the states, and that led to chaos for anyone driving across state lines. What was legal in one state was a ticket in another. The new federal framework doesn't replace state laws, but it sets a floor. States can be stricter, but they cannot be more lenient on certain key issues. This is a huge shift in how traffic law works in America, and it happened with very little public debate. I remember reading the notices from the NHTSA when they were proposing these rules, and they were buried in the Federal Register. They used language like harmonization of safety standards and interoperability of enforcement mechanisms. It was dry, boring, and easy to ignore. Meanwhile, the automotive industry was quietly building cars that met these new standards, and the tech industry was building the enforcement infrastructure. By the time the rules went into effect on January 1st, 2026, the average person had no idea what was coming. And that brings me to the most important point of this entire article. You cannot rely on the old rules. You cannot assume that because you've been driving for 30 years without a major incident, you know what you're doing. The game has changed. The rules have changed. And the penalties for not knowing have changed too. Let me give you a scenario that plays out more often than you'd think. A family from Ohio rents an SUV in Florida. They're headed to the Keys for vacation. The kids are in the back watching a movie on the built-in rear seat entertainment system. The parents are up front, and the dad is using the main screen to scroll through restaurant options for dinner. He's not drunk. He's not speeding. He's just multitasking. A police officer pulls him over because he observed the car weaving slightly within the lane. The officer approaches, sees the screen lit up with Yelp, and asks the standard question, "Were you using that while driving?" The dad says yes, but I was just looking for a place to eat. That admission, combined with the officer's observation of the weaving, is enough for a citation under the new distracted driving laws. The fine is $350. But worse than the fine, the violation is reported to the family's insurance company. Their rates go up. The vacation cost just went up by a lot. Now, you might be thinking, that's an unfair law. And maybe it is. But my job here isn't to argue whether the law is just. My job is to tell you what the law is so you can protect yourself. And protecting yourself in 2026 means being hyper-aware of what you're doing with your hands and your eyes when you're behind the wheel. It means treating the car screen like a phone. If you wouldn't scroll through Instagram at 70 miles per hour, don't scroll through your music library. It's the same distraction. There's another angle to this that involves pedestrians and cyclists. The 2026 law includes provisions for what is called vulnerable road user protection. This is a fancy term for people on foot, on bikes, on scooters, and even motorcyclists. The law increases penalties for drivers who injure or kill these users, but it also introduces new rules for how drivers must interact with them at intersections and in crosswalks. In many states now, you are required to stop and remain stopped for a pedestrian until they have completely cleared your lane in the next lane. You can't just wait until they're past your bumper and then go. You have to wait until they are safely on the sidewalk or median. This is a change that catches a lot of people off guard, especially in busy city centers. I was in New York City last spring, and I watched a taxi driver get an earful from a police officer because he edged forward while a pedestrian was still crossing in front of him. The pedestrian was fine. The taxi didn't hit anyone, but the officer saw the movement as aggressive and issued a warning. Under the new rules, that could have been a ticket. The thinking behind it is that pedestrians feel threatened when cars creep forward, and it contributes to a hostile environment for walking. Whether you agree with that or not, it's the law, and it's being enforced. Let's talk about the enforcement side for a moment, because understanding how officers think can help you avoid trouble. I've spoken to several law enforcement trainers over the past year, and they all say the same thing. The 2026 changes have given them more tools, but they've also made their jobs more complicated. In the past, a traffic stop was often based on a clear violation, like speeding or running a light. Now, officers are being trained to look for the subtle signs of technological distraction. They look at your face. They look at the angle of your head. They look at how long it takes you to react to the traffic around you. They are essentially being taught to spot the difference between a fully engaged driver and one who is letting the car do the work while they check their email. And here is a tip that might save you. If you see an officer behind you, or if you're approaching a checkpoint, put your hands on the wheel. Both hands. Keep them visible. Look straight ahead. Don't fumble with the screen. Don't reach for your phone. Don't try to turn down the music at the last second. That frantic movement is exactly what they are trained to see. It signals to them that you are doing something you shouldn't have been doing, and it gives them probable cause to dig deeper. Just sit still, breathe, and wait for them to come to you. Now, I want to address a question that comes up in every conversation I have about this topic. What about hands-free devices? Aren't those legal? The answer is yes, mostly. Hands-free calling is still permitted in most states under the new framework, but there is a catch. The law distinguishes between voice commands that are brief and those that require extended cognitive engagement. If you are having a deep, emotional conversation on a hands-free call, your mind is not on the road. And if an officer observes you missing a turn, or slowing erratically, or failing to notice a change in traffic, they can use that as evidence of distracted driving, even if your hands were on the wheel and your phone was in your pocket. The law is moving toward a definition of distraction that includes mental engagement, not just physical manipulation. This is a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. We've been conditioned to think that hands-free equals safe. But the research is pretty clear that the brain has a limited capacity for multitasking. When you're driving, Your brain should be processing the road. If it's processing a conversation, something has to give. The new law essentially codifies that reality. It doesn't ban hands-free calls outright, but it allows officers to cite you if the call is clearly impairing your driving. And let's be honest, we've all seen drivers who are clearly on a call and driving like they're the only one on the road. Now there's a legal mechanism to address that. Let's move to the topic of rental cars again, because I can't stress this enough. When you rent a car, you are stepping into a vehicle that is likely equipped with technology you've never used before. The infotainment systems vary wildly between manufacturers. Some are intuitive, some are maddeningly complex. And the pressure to get out of the rental lot and on your way is intense. But I'm telling you, from personal experience and from hearing horror stories from my audience, you need to resist that pressure. Take the time. Pull over. Figure out where the defroster is. Figure out how to adjust the mirrors. Figure out how to turn off the lane departure warning if it's beeping too much. Do all of that before you merge onto the highway. I'll give you a specific example. I rented a car in Chicago last year, a model I'd never driven before. I thought I had everything set, but as soon as I got on the interstate, the navigation screen went dark. It just shut off. I didn't know if I had accidentally hit a button, or if the system had crashed, or what. My instinct was to look down, to try to reboot it, to poke at it while driving. But I caught myself. I remembered my own advice. I put my blinker on, I moved to the right lane, and I took the next exit into a gas station. I sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes, restarted the car, and figured out that the screen had a sleep mode I didn't know about. That 5 minutes saved me from potentially causing an accident or getting a ticket. It was inconvenient, yes, but it was the right thing to do. The broader point here is that driving in 2026 requires a level of discipline that previous generations didn't need. Cars used to be mechanical. You turned the key, you shifted gears, you steered. Now they are computers on wheels. They are constantly updating, constantly beeping, constantly demanding your attention. The law is finally catching up to that reality, and it's placing the burden on you, the driver, to manage that attention appropriately. I want to touch on something that's a bit controversial, and that's the role of insurance companies in all of this. The 2026 law includes provisions that allow insurance companies to access certain data from your vehicle, with your consent, in exchange for lower rates. This is the so-called usage-based insurance model on steroids. In the past, you might have opted into a program where a dongle plugged into your car and tracked your mileage and braking. Now, with built-in connectivity, the car itself can report on your behavior. Did you slam on the brakes? Did you accelerate quickly? Did you drive late at night? All of that data can be used to calculate your risk profile. The catch is that many drivers don't realize they've opted into this. When you buy a new car, or when you sign up for certain connected services, you may be agreeing to share data without fully understanding the implications. And under the new law, that data can be used in litigation after an accident. If you're in a crash and you claim the other driver was at fault, but your car's data shows you were speeding or braking hard just before impact, that evidence can be used against you. It's a double-edged sword. It can prove you were driving safely, or it can prove you were not. My advice is to read the fine print on any connected service you activate in your car. If you're not comfortable with the idea of your driving data being stored and potentially shared, opt out. It might cost you a small convenience fee, or you might lose access to some features. But privacy is becoming a luxury in the modern world, and driving data is one of the most intimate forms of data there is. It knows where you go, when you go there, and how you drive. That's powerful information, and you should have control over who gets it. Let's circle back to the enforcement side and talk about checkpoints. DUI checkpoints have been around for decades, but they are evolving. In some states, they are now becoming safety checkpoints, where officers are checking not just for impairment, but for compliance with the new technology laws. They might ask you to show that your hands are free, or they might observe whether you're wearing headphones while driving, which is another new area of regulation. Yes, wearing headphones or earbuds in both ears while driving is now explicitly prohibited in many states under the 2026 framework. The reasoning is that you need to be able to hear emergency vehicles, horns, and other auditory cues. 1 earbud is usually allowed, but 2 is a ticket. I saw a guy in Seattle get pulled over for this. He was biking, actually, but the same logic applies to drivers. He had both earbuds in, listening to a podcast, and he rolled through a stop sign on his bike. The officer cited him for the stop sign violation and added a citation for the earbuds. The cyclist was furious. He argued that he could hear fine, that the earbuds were noise-canceling, but in transparency mode. The officer didn't care. The law says you cannot have coverage over both ears. It's that simple. Now, I know some of you are thinking, this is all too much. It's overreach. It's nanny state stuff. And I get it. I really do. There's a part of me that misses the old days when driving felt free, when the road was open and the only thing you had to worry about was a state trooper hiding behind a billboard. But the reality is that traffic deaths were climbing, distracted driving was becoming an epidemic, and the old laws weren't keeping up. The 2026 changes are a response to that. Whether they are the right response is a matter of opinion, but they are the law, and as someone who spends a lot of time on the road, I'd rather know the law than be a victim of it. I want to leave you with a few practical takeaways that you can use starting today. First, when you get in your car, before you even start the engine, ask yourself, do I need to touch that screen? If the answer is yes, do it now. Set your destination. Pick your playlist. Adjust your climate. Get it all done while you're parked. Second, if you're driving a new or unfamiliar vehicle, spend 5 minutes in a parking lot learning where the essential controls are. Don't learn them at 70 miles per hour. Third, be aware of your surroundings, not just in terms of traffic, but in terms of enforcement. If you see a construction zone, slow down, even if you don't see workers. If you see a police cruiser, put your hands on the wheel and look alert. Fourth, if you consume cannabis, understand that the old rules of "I feel fine to drive" don't apply. The law has numbers, and numbers don't care about feelings. Fifth, and this is the big one, read up on the laws in any state you plan to drive in. Just because something is legal in your home state doesn't mean it's legal in the next one. The roads are changing, the cars are changing, and the laws are changing. The driver who adapts is the driver who avoids the tickets, the points, the insurance hikes, and the accidents. The driver who ignores it all is playing a dangerous game of chance. I've been driving for long enough to know that chance is not on your side. It never was. But now, with automated enforcement and stricter standards, the odds are worse than ever. So I'll ask you again, and I really want to hear from you in the comments. When was the last time you actually looked at the driving laws? Have you been caught off guard by any of these new rules? Have you gotten a ticket for something you didn't even know was illegal? Share your story. Let's get a conversation going. Because the more we talk about this, the more we share our experiences, the better prepared we all are. And in a world where the machine is watching, being prepared is the only real defense. I'm going to keep traveling, keep driving, and keep paying attention. And I hope you will too. The road ahead is different than the road behind, but it's still a road, and we still have to navigate it together. Stay safe out there.